All righty.
Here
we are. We're live.
We are alive.
Yes, we are live. It's a bit earlier than we normally do this, and I feel like I'm feeling it. I'm like, okay, here we are.
The smoke, camera. Too. The smoke's probably doing some of it.
I know. It has been real smoky
We're in California. We don't have hurricanes. We don't even have earthquakes. We just have fires.
We don't even have earthquakes.
We just have fires.
Yeah, we got a lot don't up here.
We do.
My goodness.
We don't want to say, that man was on fire. We don't even say that anymore.
No, we don't joke about fire.
No, we don't.
Yeah,
we crazy. Just did what we shouldn't.
Well, what an exciting week you had last week at BraveCo.
Yeah, we had the BraveCo conference, and it was epic. It was otherworldly, honestly. Mm-hmm. And we had John Eldridge. He wrote Wild at Heart. If you haven't read that book, that book is epic. I think it's 20-something years old. But to hear him, share his story. It was a room full of men. I think we had 800, 900 men.
Yeah.
And there was lots of tears, lots of healing happening. It was powerful.
Super powerful. Yeah. And you guys broke a wild horse on the first night.
Inside the Civic Auditorium, no less. That was crazy.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I cannot believe you guys wheelbarrowed in so much sand for that
The guys did 35 yards of sand.
Can you even imagine?
And, made a round pen, got a round pen, had to put plywood down, obviously all that stuff to protect the Civic. But
epic.
It was epic. And then, breaking a wild horse. Todd was on that horse while he shared his message. It was like the best prop ever. It's
just
totally risky. Yeah. The horse tried 8 times to kick him. And one time we have a video of it. It just missed his head. And Todd said, I thought the horse kicked me, because of adrenaline.
Because it was
so close. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It was
crazy.
It was amazing.
Oh man. Just so exciting. Just feels like a launch of a whole movement, really.
Yeah. It really was. It really is. Yeah. So good. If you want to go to BraveCo, I think it's braveco.com.
Braveco.org.
.org. Okay.
Yes.
You can, see more about that. And we're not even advertising that.
No, it was just so powerful.
It was.
Well, and you had Jay on last week that kind of spoke into that. So
yeah, that's true. That was amazing.
Cool. Yeah. Well, today we got another topic.
Okay.
A little different than BraveCo, but we're going to go for it.
Let's try it.
We are talking about living from heaven towards earth.
Yes.
Oh man, it's one of your key messages, I feel like, really, but would be such a great refresher on, I feel like with everything going on in the world, there's this ability this thing that happens often is you get sucked into just thinking like this when really we actually are called to live from here to earth.
And actually, I just left our senior leadership meeting, and it was really, we really kind of had a very similar conversation about the fact that when we go through challenges like we're going through in the earth, with COVID and all of the ramifications of that, and social justice issues, just the things that this are so common to everyone right now.
Right.
If we go through it the right way, it increases our capacity. Mm-hmm. It's the story of the talents and the story of the Midas, like the guy that got, 1, 5, and 10, he ends up having capacity to lead 10 cities. Mm-hmm. And so he's in charge of 10 things. Yeah. He's got 10 challenges, so to speak. Mm-hmm. He solves those. And then the Lord's like, well, you should be over 10 cities. And so one of the things it's easy to lose sight of is that when we're going through challenging times is that we are actually, if we go through it the right way, it actually increases our capacity for us to lead on another level.
Right. It almost is preparing you.
Yeah. It's preparing us. It's stretching us. It's changing us.
Wow.
And, the disciples are in a boat with Jesus, and, this is a constant, ongoing conversation they have with the Lord, but the Lord says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Pharisees and Herod. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, we forgot to bring bread. And he's like, oh gosh, guys, how many times do I have to talk to you about this? Like, when we fed the 3,000 with a boy's lunch, how many baskets did we take up? When we fed the 5,000, how many baskets did we take up?
Right.
And what I'm getting at, it's easy. It's not uncommon to have a supernatural experience. It is uncommon. It's way too common to have a supernatural experience that doesn't change the way you see God's provision.
Wow.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they have an experience. They just actually came from an experience where God multiplied the bread from a boy's lunch to feed 5,000 men and women and children, maybe 8,000 people, 10,000 people, who knows, from a boy's lunch. And they're worried. Now they're worried about they didn't bring bread. And it's interesting because they had an encounter with God that was supposed to take them to a place where they thought differently.
Yeah.
So that when they encounter a problem, they think, well, this is no big deal. Remember, guys, we just went through the bread, boys' lunch, bread thing.
Right.
Instead, it didn't change their thinking.
Yep.
Like they are worried about having enough bread for the 12 of them on the boat.
Right.
Well, 13 including Jesus. And they just faced a situation where they fed thousands of people with one boy's lunch.
Right.
And the Lord's so frustrated with them. He's like, guys, how long do I have to be with you? So
yeah, it's really
that
interesting.
Sort of thing,
Yeah, where you can have an experience and have it not affect you.
Not change your thinking.
Right. Yeah, totally. Wow.
The Lord heals your sickness, and then you're worried about some other lesser thing.
Yeah.
And he's like, I can imagine the Lord, if he was Italian, he'd be like, Mamma mia.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean? Unbelievable.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Lord, you can look up, Father, are you sure these are the guys I'm supposed to be working with?
Oh, you're ridiculous.
Yeah. But, it's really important that when we have supernatural experiences, that it actually gives us faith to change the way we think about what we're going through.
Yeah.
So that it's actually so that hard things are actually leading to more capacity.
Right. When a hard situation comes your way and you don't immediately go to doom and gloom, but go, oh, the Lord's doing something here. It's like, oh.
How's he want to solve this?
Yeah. My thinking's changed a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah, totally.
And so, I think I taught this in the spiritual intelligence book.
Yes.
That there are actually three heavens. So let's just let's pretend like the people that are on here have never heard this before.
Right.
By the way, our Instagram went blank. I don't know if that's supposed to be that way. But so we'll just take in Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We call that the first heaven. Mm-hmm. Why are we calling it first heaven? Well, let's get to the third heaven one, because in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 2 through 4, Paul said, I knew a man who went to the third heaven, and he described things that are, undescribable, and he experienced things that are undescribable. So if he went to the third heaven, then that means there must be a second and a first.
Right.
So we say in Genesis 1, God created the heavens and the earth. We call it the first heaven.
Yeah.
And then Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, powers, against world forces of this darkness, against spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places.
Yeah.
So there we see demonic forces in heavenly places, and yet we know that they're not in God's heaven.
Right.
Because, the Lord, the Bible is very clear that God thrust the devil out of heaven.
Yeah.
So we call this the second heaven. This is the second realm. And then we've been raised up and seated with Christ in heavenly places. This is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4. So we've been raised up and seated with Christ in heavenly places, far above all principalities and powers.
Yep.
So I know that this sounds super spiritual, but what we're trying to say is, when we have a first heaven problem, which is the world around us, the world we touch, we feel, we're not going to solve a first heaven problem that's caused by a second heaven devil without a third heaven solution.
Right. That is really good.
you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so often we're here and we're wrestling with first heaven issues,
right,
that are caused by second heaven devils. And we're not taking our third heaven seat. Like, we've been raised up and seated with Christ in heavenly places. But the challenge is that we often are living from earth to heaven instead of heaven to earth.
Right.
You see where I'm going?
That's huge.
And I'm saying if you and I have a problem and it's totally human,
right?
Like we have a relational issue, then yes, there's some power in just the fact that we just need maybe a counselor to get along.
Right, yeah.
But if we have a second heaven issue, like the devil is actually working against you and me in our relationship,
right?
I'm not going to solve that with the first heaven counselor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm only going to solve it with the third heaven answer, right?
Right.
So I think it's really important that we're in this challenging season,
right?
Where we're having COVID issues, people sick. I mean, several of our friends have been or are sick,
right?
And we're like, okay, where is this coming from, and how do we solve it?
Right. And how do you kind of access those third heaven solutions?
Well, I think first of all, we have to have faith to realize that we are actually currently seated in heavenly places. Like it's not a theology.
Yep.
It's not a philosophy. It's a reality.
Yeah.
When I began to realize that this is actually where I'm seated in Christ, then I start to realize, okay, well, I have access to it. Like it's just like this. If I said, Ellie, I put $1 million in your bank account, and you're like, I don't believe that. Well, you're not going to go to the bank and access it because you don't actually believe it.
Right. Yeah.
Or let's say you're ignorant of it. Let's say I put $1 million in the bank and the next day I die and I don't ever tell you about it. You could be living in poverty, not even realizing that you have full access to an account that you have never actually withdrawn anything from.
That is really powerful.
And that's, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. Like
wow.
What I'm getting at is so many of God's people perish because they don't actually know that they have access to this account.
So good.
Or they don't believe it.
Right.
Either they hear it and don't believe it, or they don't hear it because nobody teaches them that you don't have to live in this level of poverty because you have access to prosperity in God. And right now we're talking about the power of God, the wisdom of God, the knowledge of God that transcends.
And you always have access to it. It's always readily available.
To Christians, all believers, everyone who's been born again.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting in D.C. in a think tank, and a bunch of us went. We were so excited to go to this think tank, and we were it was a 3-day meeting, and where we were there to actually solve some of the toughest problems in America. Wow. And there was about 40 of us, some of the really powerful, brightest minds in the nation were brought there, and then obviously they brought us too.
And they brought me.
Yeah, they brought me. I'm like, all right, what am I doing in here? I mean, these were like PhDs. Guys most of them had multiple, degrees.
Right.
So, definitely I was hanging out with, I was a chicken hanging out with eagles for sure.
No.
But so, the first 3 sessions, like we were there all day from morning till night for 3 days. That was the goal at least. And the first 3 sessions they were explaining statistically what's going on in America.
Yeah.
And it was really insightful. It's like all the statistics of what's happening with fatherlessness, what's happening with immorality, all this. And it went on and on with PowerPoints and very, passionate people explaining the problem.
Yeah.
And then in the evening, they started to talk about solutions. And we went on and on. We were there for probably 10 hours, and I was there with like 3 other guys, and I was like astounded that we were in a Christian meeting of people trying to solve serious world problems, and there was no talk about third heaven solutions. Interesting.
So it was all just trying to like put your hardest thinking cap on, and you find the solution.
Yeah, it was all about humanitarian efforts, and and which were all good. I'm good with all of that, And the funny thing is, there was a large front room. We were in this kind of mansion, and then there was also a balcony where a bunch of us sat, where you could see into the front room.
Yeah.
And so the last session that I was in, we were sitting up in the balcony, just kind of like when you got there a little bit later. You got there, the worse the seats were, of course. And so there were our 3 guys and myself were sitting in the balcony, and we're overlooking the whole meeting.
Yeah.
And So you could raise your hand and make a comment or ask questions. So this guy's presenting, he's brilliant, and we've already had like 6 presenters. And so I raise my hand and I say, hey, I have a question. It's actually kind of a comment. And he's like, okay, what is it? And I said, it's funny to me that we're talking about first heaven problems without third heaven solutions. And so the room just went, whoop, totally quiet.
Wow.
And they're like, well, Mr. Vallotton, you have some more to say about that. And I said, well, about the 3 heavens. They're like, no, not really. So I explained in simple terms, just like we just did, about, these 3 heavens that we live in, the first heaven and the third heaven. And I said, it feels to me like we have a second heaven problem. Like we have a deauthorized and disarmed and defeated devil who is actually taking authority that God hasn't given him.
Wow. And
he's wreaking havoc on a first heaven people.
Yeah.
And if we don't think from up here, and I was in the balcony, I said, Revelation 4 said, Jesus said, come up here and I'll show you what must take place after these things. I said, we kind of have to come up here so that we can actually see things from God's perspective.
It's really good.
And understand what the real root issues of our problems are.
Yeah.
And so it was a very, let me say this, our whole team left. That night we're like, yeah, we don't need to stay here because a humanitarian effort isn't going to solve the world's problem.
They weren't willing to come up here.
No, it was like, but the smartest, the guy who was the most prominent in the room, who had written 15 books, he came over afterwards, right after that, and it was like dinner time, and he said, that's the most profound thing I've ever heard. Can you tell me more about that? So we talked for like 20 minutes with our team, and he said, oh my gosh, that is really amazing. I've never heard anything like this before. And we're talking about it right here. Like this is our goal. Our goal is to tap into spiritual intelligence and solve problems that the world has with God's intelligence.
Right. I've heard you say believers should be the most brilliant people on the planet.
Yeah, we're the only people that have the access to the mind of the God who made everything.
Right.
1 Corinthians chapter 2, we have the Spirit of God in us who knows the thoughts of God, and therefore we have access to the mind of God, so that we don't just think like God, we actually think God thoughts.
Exactly.
So it's super exciting. I'm super excited about where we're heading.
Yeah. What are some key symptoms? Like if someone's like, I wonder if I'm, living from heaven to earth or from earth to heaven. What are some key symptoms of somebody that is living from heaven to earth? Or maybe you could do opposite, from earth to heaven.
Well, heaven to earth is the impossible seems logical. It's like if you've seen bread, multiplied so that a little boy's lunch feeds 5,000. Yeah. Then the next time you get into a situation that is really like seems like there's no answer.
Right.
It doesn't feel irrational to believe that God's going to do, going to solve this problem in a really crazy way, right?
Right.
So I think that's one symptom.
Key symptom.
The symptom that you're living from heaven towards earth, which we've all obviously done, is that you worry all the time.
Or you mean from earth?
From earth to heaven. Yeah. Thanks for correcting me.
Yeah.
Is that you worry all the time. You worry all the time. Like you're always worried. Like everything is a problem. Like you're doing what the disciples did. I'm doing what the disciples did on the boat. I'm like, oh, I forgot to bring bread when I just left a revival meeting where God provided, made bread from nothing.
Right.
I was at a wedding the month before where he turned water into wine. I was with him 3 months before when we had the big tax bill to pay, and he said, go fishing. And, and it's just like, and I was with them the year before when he raised Lazarus from the dead. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, we're in so much trouble. We forgot to bring food. It's like,
what will we do?
What will we do?
Totally.
And, are we not all guilty of that? Like, are we not all guilty of seeing God do this miraculous work? We have this great testimony, and then we're in a situation, the next day, and we're like, I'm so worried.
Yeah. You can't go to bed that night. You're just laying there stressed out of your mind. Oh, yeah.
Sweat's beating up on your forehead, and you're like, we're all going to die. And then the Lord's like, did you see the resurrection? Did you, so it's like that.
You remember yesterday when yeah, totally.
But here's the challenge, Ellie. Honestly, most Christians have had a third heaven experience where God's just busted in on you and he solved something for you. Well, let's say this, you got saved. So, that's a third heaven experience. That's the best third heaven experience you've ever had right there.
Right.
But the challenge is that what the challenge I gave to our staff today, our team, is this. I could take all the stories of God's supernatural intervention in my life, and I can preach them in one preach in an hour. And it sounds like you are the most spiritual man I've ever met. But, but the problem is that those stories are stretched out over 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not my norm.
Right.
And it needs to be. See, this is the challenge. It needs to be my norm. Now, a story I've told here before, but I want to repeat it, is the story of Elisha and the widow. She's become a widow. Her husband was a prophet, and he left her with a bunch of debt. And she has two sons who, in those days, they're going to put them in debtor prison. And Elijah says, how are you doing? She tells him that story, and he says, what do you have? And she says, nothing but a little bit of oil. And then he tells her to get a whole bunch of vessels, like jars and pots and I imagine like milk crates, whatever they had, and bring them in the bedroom. So she does that. He takes a little bit of oil and he pours it, and it fills, I don't know, hundreds of vessels, 100 vessels, 50 vessels. Who knows? It doesn't number them. And when she stops bringing vessels, the oil stops flowing. And then he says, sell the oil. And pay off your debt and keep the rest for your sons. Well, here's the deal. Let's say she owed $100,000. If Elisha would have had $100,000 in his bank account and he was like, oh, what do you need? Oh, okay, I'll just write you a check. He would not have experienced a supernatural answer because he actually solved it at the lower levels.
Wow, yeah.
Are you with me? He solved it at the human level, and therefore he didn't even try to tap into a third heaven answer, right?
Right.
What I'm getting at is that often we believers have third heaven miracles because, in my metaphor, we have no money. Like there is no other way.
Right.
So we tell this story that happened, 20 years ago. And God intervened and he fixed my problem because I prayed. And I'm like, that's great. Awesome. What if let's go back to my story. Yeah. Let's pretend I have the $100,000 in the bank and you need the $100,000. In other words, I can solve this at the lower level.
Yep.
But instead of doing that, I first tap into the mind of Christ.
Yep.
And I say, Father, how do you want to handle this? And he may say, write Mark a check. All right, great. I solved the problem. It seemed like a first heaven solution, but the Lord said, write Mark a check. That's why I gave you this money, write Mark a check. But he may say, have Mark take the oil and pour it into jars. What I'm getting at is that what would happen if we actually tapped into the mind of Christ, not when we had to, but all the time.
All the time, yeah. That is really good. What if we did that?
What if we did? I'm not talking just to them. I'm talking to me, to us. I'm like, wouldn't it be awesome if we didn't have to be in a terrible situation
to go, oh my gosh, God, are you there?
I'm drowning.
Yeah. Totally.
Send me a boat. And he's like, walk on water. Is there anyone else up there? Have the three of you talked about this?
Totally. Oh man. Wow.
It's just that kind of crazy. So, I want to have neural pathways
that is good.
to third heaven solutions. Yep. And I want it to be like a 10-lane freeway.
Yeah.
To these, I don't want my testimonies to be, months apart or years apart. Like I want to live like this. I want to God, here's my problem. And he's like, here's your solution. I'm like, all right, let's walk that out.
Yep.
And it doesn't always have to be irrational, like, like the oil. It doesn't always have to be like that. I think lots of times the Lord's like, hey, I put that money in your account, pay for that, buy that thing, pay for that thing. Right. But I think that the only way you develop a lifestyle is to pray first before you write the check.
Yeah.
Well, bro, we've done everything else. We might as well pray. Well, when you've done everything else, then pray. I'm like, no, pray and then do everything else.
That's good. That is really good.
Reverse order.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well. That was a lot of information, just jam packed, but that was so encouraging. And I feel like, man,
what we're thinking about right now.
Yeah, it feels timely for sure.
Yeah.
So maybe if you want to just encourage the people watching today,
Yeah, I do.
This.
Paul wrote to Timothy and talked about the impartation that he received from in this case, from some of the prophetic people. And he said to him, you received gifts that were given to you when the elders laid hands on you. And then he said, I want you to take those gifts and I want you to do something with them. I want you to he used the word strive, which is interesting. He said, I want you to strive to see these gifts grow in you until your progress is made known to everyone. Mm-hmm. I want to say the same to you. Like, I want to pray for you, but I think most people watching this podcast, like, you have gifts. Like, you have more than you need, but you got to do something. I have to do something with what I've been given. I have to get off my no. I have to get off my stool and get in my throne. I tricked you. Got to get in my heavenly throne, and I got to start living from heaven towards earth. By the way, it's the exhortation to me as much as it is to you. So, Lord, I just pray right now that you would give us faith, that we come out of fear, because fear keeps us in our earthly stool, but faith takes us to our heavenly throne. Lord, I pray that you would break the power of fear in our lives, and that we begin to live in these Holy Spirit solutions. And I thank you for all these people who follow us and who listen to us. And I bless their homes, their children, their finances, their minds. And I pray for perfect peace that what surpasses all understanding to be theirs in Christ Jesus. Amen.
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 That was great.
Till we see you again.
Till next time.
Next week.
Yes.
Next week. See you next week.